Did you think that a spiritual awakening would be easy? Because I did, and my awakening was intense, confusing, and very overwhelming until I learned some crucial lessons that brought me real peace and acceptance with everything that was happening. So to help you avoid the struggle and confusion that I faced, here are 20 lessons I wish I'd known that will make your awakening feel easier, clearer, and more purposeful. Number 1. During my awakening, everything that I've suppressed or ignored came bubbling up to the surface. Old fears, trauma, the good old childhood stuff, it all came up to the surface. It was like opening a closet and having a lifetime's worth of emotional baggage fall right on top of me. So I got very impatient. I kept thinking, haven't I done enough work? Why am I not healed yet? Why can't I just be over this already? But no matter how much I wanted to fast forward through the pain and the letting go, the healing just kept going. It was frustrating and I just wanted to be done with it. And here was the first lesson. If it took years to build up all the pain, trauma, and unhealthy patterns, it's only natural that it will take a while to release them as well. This actually reminds me of my time in New York as a personal trainer, because once I had a client who told me that she had gained a few pounds every year for the last decade, and now she wanted to lose all that extra weight. So she asked me, how many weeks do you think it'll take for me to lose all of this weight? And I had to set her expectations straight, and I told her, if it took you 10 years to put all of this weight on, it's going to take months to lose it in a healthy, sustainable way, not weeks. And healing works the same way. So be realistic with yourself. The patterns and pain that you're working through didn't show up overnight, and they won't disappear overnight either. Number 2. When my spiritual awakening began, I thought that I was prepared. I'd done my homework, I read all the self-help books, I meditated every day, and I felt like I was already very aware and conscious of my patterns. I thought, I got this, I'm ready for whatever comes my way. But then the real work actually started. And let me tell you, it wasn't just a kind of gentle nudge from the universe, it was more like being hit by a spiritual train, because suddenly all these deep-seated fears, doubts, and old wounds bubbled up. Life threw challenge after challenge at me, and it just kept coming, and I wasn't just uncomfortable, I was completely overwhelmed. And all the calm and clarity I thought I had built, it was gone. And honestly, I felt very lost. I felt betrayed by the whole idea of awakening, and I was just overwhelmed. And a spiritual awakening is going to be harder than you think. That was my second big lesson. Spiritual awakening isn't just about feeling more peaceful or enlightened. It's about facing parts of yourself you didn't even know existed. It's messy, it's confusing, and it's very painful. And that's to be expected. So if you're feeling thrown off balance or like you're failing, you're not. You're actually right where you need to be. Number 3. I found myself dealing with challenge after challenge, mentally, physically, and emotionally. I was triggered all the time. I was dealing with old fears, traumas, and panic attacks. It was just emotional chaos overall, like nonstop. And just when I would hit my limit, I would think, okay, this must be as bad as it gets. And then life would throw something else at me. For example, there was one particular instance where I was struggling to hold myself together and to manage everything happening internally. I was dealing with challenges in my relationship, and then out of nowhere, my wonderful manager suddenly left the company. And then I got a new manager who made my everyday awful. And it honestly felt like the universe was stacking all odds against me, seeing if I would break. And here's the third lesson. Just when you think you can't take it anymore, more will be added. But what helped me survive it is that I started treating it like a video game. Every new challenge was just another level. Every emotional meltdown or tough situation meant that I would be getting more experience points. And I know it sounds quite silly, but imagining myself as a character leveling up made the chaos feel less personal and more like a test that I could pass. Number 4. I can't even tell you the amount of emotional pain that I felt during my awakening. It was like nothing I'd ever experienced in my entire life, and it felt like I had descended into my own personal inner hell, and I had no idea how to climb out of it. The suffering was so deep, and I actually wondered if I could even survive it. During that time, I also started working with a spiritual coach, and in one of our sessions, she looked at me and she said, "I see how much you're struggling, but remember this, don't get stuck in your suffering. Pain is necessary, but suffering is a choice." And that one line changed how I went through the rest of my awakening. And here's the lesson I wish I'd known sooner. If you're suffering, you're stuck. If you're in pain, you're moving through it. When you're in pain, it means that you're actually processing, feeling, and moving through the experience, even if it hurts, because you're working towards letting it go. Pain is part of the healing, but suffering is when you get stuck. You keep recycling the same emotions, replaying the same stories, and you don't let them go. You're not moving forward, but you're just stuck in a loop. So when you find yourself deep in emotional pain, ask yourself, am I feeling this so I can heal? Or am I wallowing in keeping myself stuck? Number 5. Boy, oh boy, I got triggered so much during my awakening. I'm almost embarrassed to admit it, because it felt like everything set me off. What people said, how they acted, even tiny things would send me spiraling. And I kept thinking, why can't everyone just behave differently? Why can't the world just make this easier for me? And honestly, it felt like everyone and everything was doing things wrong, and I just wanted it all to be different. And that's when I stumbled across a book called The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. And the analogy that he shared completely changed how I saw my triggers. He talks about having a thorn in your arm. So imagine that this thorn is touching a nerve, and every time something brushes against it, you're in pain. And you have two choices. You can spend your life trying to make sure that nothing ever touches that thorn. You can protect it, you can tiptoe around it, you can ask others to be super careful, or you can do the hard work of pulling it out. And most of us go for option 1, but all that does is makes the thorn the center of our lives. The more we try to protect it, the more it controls us. And here's the 5th lesson that I learned. Get curious about your triggers, because they are messengers. Your triggers aren't just there to make you miserable. They're actually trying to tell you something important about yourself. It's not about making the world tiptoe around your pain or avoiding anything that makes you uncomfortable. It's about getting curious. So ask yourself, what is this trigger trying to show me? What's underneath this reaction? Number 6. I was obsessed with self-help books, podcasts, every spiritual video I could find. I couldn't get enough of it, and I felt like I was collecting wisdom, stacking up insights, and memorizing every tip and trick out there. But here's the thing, none of it was actually changing my life. I was learning a lot, but nothing was shifting in how I felt, how I thought, or how I acted. And eventually I realized that I had to do something radical. I stopped reading, I put down the books, I didn't listen to podcasts, and I decided to actually start applying what I had learned. And it meant that I was learning less, because in books I could read, tens and tens of tips and healing exercises. But in practice, I could only do 2 or 3 at a time. But that's when things finally began to change. My emotions, my thinking, even my behaviors started to shift. And it wasn't about what I knew, it was about what I practiced. Because imagine you buy a beautiful cookbook and you read it cover to cover, you memorize every recipe and ingredient, but if you never step into the kitchen, what's the point? You can't taste the dishes and you can't cook them just reading about it. Reading recipes isn't the same as cooking, and it's exactly the same with the inner work. And here's the 6th lesson. You can't read or listen or watch your way through it. You need to do the work. All the knowledge in the world won't help if you're not actually practicing and living what you learn. Number 7. Every time I got really triggered, whether it was a panic attack, anger, or just feeling totally overwhelmed, I would sit for hours and analyze it to death. I would ask myself, what caused this? Where did it come from? What, from my past is making me react this way? And then to top it off, I would repeat affirmations like, I am calm, I am present, or do a meditation before, before getting into a certain reaction. And those things were helpful and suiting in the moment, but I realized I was using them as a way to move, or actually as a way to avoid what was actually happening in real life. So instead of endlessly analyzing my triggers or trying to meditate or affirm my way out of every tough situation, I had to learn a more difficult skill, actually handling things in the moment. I had to feel the emotions and figure out how to regulate my emotions in real time, how to not be impulsive, how to not lash out, and how to pause before reacting. And that's where the real change happened for me. And this is the next lesson I want you to know. The work isn't in meditations, visualizations, or affirmations. It's in dealing with real life. It's not about escaping into your head or hiding behind a mantra. The real growth happens when you're in the middle of a messy or a difficult moment and you choose to respond differently. When you catch yourself about to snap and instead you pause. When you feel the urge to run away or overthink, but instead you stay present and handle it. Number 8. I found myself getting quite angry at my ex-partner for the way that he acted. I would be frustrated with my coworkers for how they did things or managed things. And I would even be annoyed with spiritual teachers online because they would make everything sound so easy. And I would think, you are full of shit. This doesn't make any sense. You have no idea what I'm going through. You're wrong. It's way more difficult. And I felt like everyone around me was making my awakening harder than it needed to be. But then it hit me. I wasn't really angry at them. I was projecting my pain onto other people because honestly, it was way easier than looking at myself. And I was struggling so much with my own pain that blaming others felt like relief. And I needed relief. And this was my next lesson. You are the source of your pain, not other people. And it's very tough to admit, but most of the time, the anger and frustration that we feel towards others, it's really about what's going on inside of us. We lash out, we blame, we judge, we are snarky because it's easier than facing our own discomfort or pain. But the real healing starts when you turn the focus inward and you ask, what's actually going on with me right now? Number 9, trying to talk to others about what I was going through and what I was experiencing during my awakening was very frustrating and also discouraging. I would open up about my struggles, hoping for understanding and validation, but instead I would get silence or comments like, I think you're overreacting a little bit, or it's not that bad, or, why are you so upset about this? And some people even made me feel like my feelings weren't reasonable, or that my questions about the world were just me being dramatic. And it hurt, and at the same time, it made me feel even more alone. And honestly, sometimes it made me question myself. Was I really making too much out of nothing? Was I just being unreasonable? But eventually I realized something important. I was trying to get validation from people who simply couldn't understand what I was going through. They weren't in my shoes and they never would be. And I really want you to hear this next lesson. No one will ever truly understand what you're going through, so you need to validate your own experience. If you're feeling something, it's valid, period. Your experience is real and you don't need anyone else's approval or understanding to make it important and valid. The moment I stopped looking for outside validation and started trusting my own feelings, everything changed. I gave myself permission to feel what I felt without needing to explain it or justify it to anyone else. If I was feeling it, it was real and it was valid. Number 10. With time, I got better at regulating my emotions. I learned how to quiet those intrusive thoughts, and I started to learn how to stop being impulsive with my reactions. But did I actually feel proud of myself? Well, not really, because as soon as I handled one thing, my mind would immediately jump to the next thing that I needed to fix or to heal or to work on. And there was always another trigger, another challenge, another piece of work to do. And I never stopped to notice how far I had come. And that's when I decided to start a journal where I would track my small day-to-day or month-to-month wins, like the time I didn't lash out when I was triggered, or when I managed to calm myself down before a full-blown panic attack. Writing those moments down made a huge difference because suddenly I could actually see my progress. And here's an important lesson. Celebrate the little wins. It is so easy to focus on what still needs fixing and what still needs healing that you forget to notice what's actually getting better. So every time you deal with a trigger a little bit quicker, every time you regulate your emotions a little bit better, or even if you just pause before reacting, that's a victory. And those small wins add up, and they're proof that you're growing and you're learning and you're progressing through this awakening experience, even if at the time it doesn't feel like it. Number 11. I used to get impatient and snap at people all the time. I would also make snarky or passive-aggressive comments, and I know it's not nice and I'm embarrassed and I'm aware of it, but it took me some time to realize that this behavior was just indicating that I didn't want to deal with my own anger. It was easier to just project it onto everyone else around me, and it felt easier to lash out than to face what was going on inside. But here's where things changed. I decided to try something different. Instead of letting my anger spill out onto others, I started finding ways to release it by myself. I bought this pool noodle and I would smack it against the bed whenever I felt that, I had a lot of anger and I wanted to explode. I would scream into pillows, I would lay on the floor and shake my whole body. And I even went to an anger release workshop where we screamed, punched, and growled together. And I know it sounds kind of insane, but I felt so much better afterwards. And the anger wasn't bottled up in me anymore, and hence it wasn't aimed at anybody else anymore. And suddenly I didn't feel like lashing out. So release your anger alone before you release it onto others. Your anger is valid. It's important to feel it, but it doesn't have to become someone else's problem. So when you find safe, healthy ways to let it out, you protect your relationships and actually process what you're feeling instead of projecting it onto others. Number 12. I did a lot of inner work alone. I worked through workbooks, I listened to audios and podcasts, I followed online workshops, and honestly, it got me pretty far. I made a lot of progress by myself, but then at some point I hit a block. Suddenly I wasn't sure what to do next or even what I should be working on anymore. I felt a little bit lost. And that's when I realized maybe to progress into the next stage of growth, I actually needed to work with someone more experienced. That's when I started working with a coach and I joined an online program with other people. And hearing from someone who had actually been through what I was experiencing and they came out on the other side successfully gave me insights, guidance, and hope that I never could have found on my own. So if you have the resources, work with someone to support you, a coach or a mentor. There's something powerful about having someone in your corner who understands the journey you're going through, somebody who can offer new perspectives, and somebody who helps you see what you might be missing. And you don't have to figure it out by yourself. Number 13. I did a lot of inner work with my coach and by myself during my awakening. And during this time, I also spent a lot of time at home. I made quite a lot of progress, but then I started to see a bit of a pattern. Every time I did a lot of work on myself and I would make progress and successfully work on my healing and triggers. And then I went and stepped into the outside world and was faced with new people, new experiences, and new situations. Something new would then show up, a new trigger, a new thing to work through. And I was like, why is this happening? But the thing is, being around others and being out in the world triggered parts of me that I didn't even know were still raw. And I realized that's the whole point. And that's what sped up my healing and growth. And here's an important lesson. This work cannot be done in isolation. You need the world and others to help you heal. When you're alone, it's easy to think that you've dealt with everything successfully, that you've done a lot of healing, but it's only when you step out into the world, when you interact with others, when you allow yourself to be seen, that you actually discover what still needs your attention. So don't isolate yourself fully during your spiritual awakening. Yes, during an awakening, you are going to be more of a hermit and you'll want to spend time alone, but being involved out there in the world with other people, it's still essential. The world and the people in it are like mirrors, showing you the spots that you still need to heal. Number 14. I spent a lot of time during this time as well online reading about other people's spiritual awakenings because it made me feel less alone and less crazy. People were going through what I was going through, but there were also some stories that made it sound easier, or like they breezed through it in a few months and came out enlightened on the other side. And when I shared my experiences, there were some people that said that what I was going through wasn't really an awakening and that I was still stuck in my ego and I was still functioning from my ego. So I would often find myself thinking, is my awakening wrong? Am I doing something wrong? Should I be experiencing different things? Am I not progressing through it how I should be progressing? And that's when I realized that I was getting way too invested in what everyone else was experiencing, and I was measuring my progress against theirs. So it left me feeling frustrated, stuck, and confused. So this next lesson is crucial. Don't get too involved in other people's experiences because every awakening is different. The truth is, your journey is yours alone. No one else has your exact history, your unique challenges, or those specific lessons that only your soul needs to learn. And the more I focused on what I should be feeling or how I should be progressing through my awakening, the more disconnected I became from my own experience. And it was only when I turned my attention back to myself, trusting my process, honoring my own timeline, that I started to see the lessons that were only meant for me to learn. Number 15. Before my awakening, I was one of those people who, got out of bed at 6 a.m., went to the gym 5 to 6 times a week, and still had a lot of energy throughout the day. I could focus, I slept really, really well, and I honestly thought that that's just who I am. But then when my awakening hit, everything kind of flipped upside down because suddenly I was exhausted all the time. Waking up early was a struggle, and even when I did, it felt like I barely slept. I had really restless sleep. I would wake up many times, 6 to 8 times during the night. I had nightmares, and I kept expecting myself to function the same way I always had. And every time I couldn't, I got frustrated and judged myself. What's wrong with me? Why can't I just push through? I need to be more disciplined. I need to be more motivated. And I really want you to hear me on this one. You can't force yourself to have as much energy as you've always had. It's unrealistic. When you're going through an awakening, you're dealing with so much. Emotionally, mentally, physically, energetically, your body and mind are processing more than you realize. So, of course, your energy is going to change, and expecting yourself to operate at full power all the time just isn't fair or kind towards yourself. Number 16. Imagine you're about to drive through a desert, over mountains, through potholes and mud. Would you want to do it in a tiny, rusty old car that might break down at any moment? Of course not. You would probably want a sturdy four-wheeler that can handle the very rough terrain and get you safely to the other side. And your body is your vehicle during this journey. If you neglect it, the road gets even bumpier and harder, so you have to take care of it. Just because I was tired and low on energy, it didn't mean that I could throw all of my healthy habits out the window. This is the time, actually, more than ever, to take care of yourself. You need to prioritize healthy eating, sleep, movement, and good habits. And I know that yes, you are exhausted and you're less motivated and you're overwhelmed, but that's exactly why you need to take extra care of yourself. This is not an excuse to abandon healthy habits. Number 17. I've been in the world of spirituality for 15 years. I've meditated, journaled, and explored every spiritual teaching that I could get my hands on. But I also come from an academic background of psychology, and that gave me a unique perspective. And I know that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, but we're also humans with brains and bodies that work in very specific ways. And at some point I realized that just focusing on the spiritual and energetic side wasn't fully enough, because I needed to learn real practical skills to work with my mind and my body. So that's when I started using psychological and body-based practices, things like grounding exercises, breath work, and nervous system regulation techniques. And these weren't just nice to have, they actually were my lifeline, because they helped me manage my emotions, they helped me calm my physical body, my anxiety, and helped me manage those panic attacks. So I really suggest that you learn psychological and body first practices together with spiritual and energetic practices. So it's psychology and spirituality combined, because this is the perfect mix. You don't have to choose one or the other, because true healing happens when you bring both together. You're using the wisdom of spirituality alongside the practical tools of psychology and body work. Number 18. Because I was working through so much, every day felt like a new challenge. My mind was racing with thoughts, my emotions were quite literally all over the place, and I constantly had new insights. It got very overwhelming very quickly, and that's when I started doing something simple but life-changing. I began to document everything. I would spend hours each week writing in my paper journal, or making video diaries, or recording audio messages just for myself. And sometimes I just needed to talk out loud about what I was going through, to kind of get it all off my chest. And at first it was just a way to cope, but over the years I realized it was so much more than that. That's why I can't stress this enough. Document your experiences, because it will be invaluable later. Looking back through my journals and recordings, I could see my progress. I could spot patterns, I could see the lessons, and I could notice how much I had grown, even if it didn't feel like it in the moment. And those records became proof that I was moving forward, no matter how slow it seemed. So you might not think much of it right now, but having a record of your journey is like having a map of your transformation. It helps you see where you've been, what you survived, how far you've come, what lessons you learned. And I have years worth of these journals and recordings, and it's incredibly valuable. So I really cannot suggest enough that you document your experiences. Number 19. There were days when I would just cry and beg the universe or whatever higher power was listening to just make it all stop. I didn't want to go through this anymore, and I just wanted out. But of course, it didn't stop, because no matter how much I pleaded, the only thing I could do was focus on surviving each day, doing the work, and hoping that things would eventually get better. And in those moments, I couldn't see any bigger reason behind what I was going through. There was no grand purpose, no shining light at the end of the tunnel. It was just me doing my best to get through another week. But then as time went on and I started learning each lesson along the way, things began to fall into place. I started to see meaning and purpose that I'd never had felt before. And looking back now, I realized that every struggle I faced had been leading me somewhere. Each lesson unlocked a new door, and eventually I could see the bigger picture. So please trust me when I say there is a bigger reason for this, and with time, you're going to see it. You may not see the purpose in your awakening while you're in the thick of it. And yeah, most of the time you really won't, and I definitely didn't. Because all you can do is focus on the work in front of you and trust the process and just keep moving forward. But I really want you to know this. The meaning will reveal itself. The dots will connect, and you will understand why you had to go through this experience. Number 20. It was very easy to be wrapped up in my own experience during my awakening because there was so much pain, there was so much inner work, there were so many emotions, and honestly, I couldn't see past myself. It's a very egocentric time. Everything feels like it's about you, it's about your struggles and your healing. And don't get me wrong, this is not a bad thing. But as I started to come out the other side, something clicked. I realized that I wasn't meant to just survive this for my own sake. There was a bigger picture. And I made it through the darkness and I learned the lessons, and suddenly it wasn't just about me anymore. So I started thinking, how can I help others get through this? How can I share what I've learned so someone else doesn't have to feel as lost or alone as I did? And that's when I understood. You have to get out of your own bubble and see how you can serve others. It's easy to get stuck in your own story, but true growth and fulfillment comes when you turn your focus outwards, when you use what you've learned from your own experience to support others. And in that way, you gain and you find a deeper sense of purpose. Your pain and your journey become a source of hope and guidance for someone else. If you're still in the middle of your awakening, I hope these insights make your path a little bit easier, a little less lonely, and a lot more meaningful. But here's the thing, nobody really talks about what comes after, what happens when the chaos quiets down and you go through your spiritual awakening. So watch this video next where I share with you 3 important things that happen once your spiritual awakening ends.